Hello and welcome to our May pre-session. By the end of this video, we want you guys to just have had some time to really reflect on your learning this last year. Think about our ACL framework and what components you have implemented into your classroom, which ones you felt successful with, and then decide on making a plan for next year and what next steps you'll be able to take. Just as a reminder, the little journal symbol is expecting you to pause and respond to some of those questions. Again, feel free to write them down in your Google Doc or a journal or a notebook. Each reflection is an opportunity for you to see where you are in this process, and hopefully you'll be able to access your notes for further use. Here is our overall ACL framework for this past year. There is so much to celebrate. You guys have done amazing work this year and have had great growth as well. We know that there are many layers to this, and some of the parts I'm sure still feel quite sticky. So take a moment and jot down what parts you're really feeling confident with. Maybe note some successes you've seen in the classroom, and then also take some time to figure out what parts are you still not quite understanding, or which ones are not evident in your classroom on a daily basis, or still feeling a little sticky. As you have been reflecting on your ACL framework, thinking about where your successes have been and where things might be a little sticky, I want you to make some connections between our mathematical teaching practices. Remember, this is based off of research and best practices in the classroom from Principles to Action. This is by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So when we look through our teaching practices, all of them align with our ACL framework. The main one starting with our standards wall. We need to establish learning goals and have those really focus on the learning. We want all students to feel empowered, and we want all students to really deeply understand mathematical practices. So take a moment and read through these teaching practices and see where they might align or not align yet with your ACL framework.
One of the main things we can do is actually, walking the walk instead of just talking the talk. And what I mean by that is I walk into, as a consultant for my district, I can walk into different buildings in the district, different classrooms, and I see growth mindset language everywhere.
Yes.
Do your best. You can be whatever you want to be. But then when I see the actions, and this isn't, at the fault of the teacher, because I think, we do what we learned, we do what happened to us, and it becomes just a part of what we do naturally. I say naturally, but really it's learned behavior based on our own experience. So we say these things that you can continue to learn, but then oftentimes our assessment and evaluation practices promote the opposite. So for example, if I have a test on Friday and a student struggles on that test, my question is it possible then, if I have a growth mindset, that the student may learn more about this idea after the test? And if I believe in a growth mindset, or, which a lot of people would say, yeah, sure, of course they could learn more. So then my question would be, then does that mark matter if 2 weeks from now that student does achieve or show an understanding of that content? So if that's true, if a growth mindset is a thing, then we need to promote that students grow at different rates, right? Their brains grow at different rates. Their experiences are all varied and different. Some students are very lucky to have parents that talk about numbers and math at home, and other students don't have parents at home at all. So when we look at these different experiences, we have to give students the opportunity to continue growing regardless of what my assessment, or dare I say it, my evaluation, which usually is sort of like an end to learning. When I evaluate, I'm like sort of ending this learning, and I'm looking at it as, no, we do more assessment, and the purpose of assessment is to help students get to the next place in their journey, which also means that when I'm assessing or evaluating at the end of a year or a course, that evaluation should actually describe what the student knows and understands and can do now, not what they knew, understood, and could do in September or October or November. If now is January, then I should be describing what they can do now. And I would say if we do more of that, then we can truly foster a growth mindset instead of just putting it on the wall saying that, you can grow and, your brains grow and just work harder and everything's going to be okay. Let's show students that this is real by giving them opportunities and letting them see, look at the change that you've made by putting in this extra effort. Holy smokes, you're now here. And that's really all I care about. I don't really care about this anymore. We're not going to let this punish you for the remainder of the school year.
So true. Okay, so you just touched on all that, but so now I'm pivoting into assessment and growth mindset. So my next question is, what role does assessment play in this process to foster a growth mindset? But do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I guess just to kind of put a like a stamp on it, it has everything to do with fostering a growth mindset. Because again, if I use the language, but my actions through assessment and evaluation say something else, then I am essentially telling students that it's not actually a thing. It's not real, right? And, an example I would use just to kind of give another example is, a player on a team, on a sports team, might be hockey now that we're into hockey season. The beginning of the year, the player's having a hard time, can't shoot the puck, can't score goals, can't do any of those things. If near the end of the year, that player is actually now able to shoot and score even more so than everyone else, are you going to put them on the fourth line where they started the school year? Or you go, you know what, we're going to average it. You should be on the first line, but at the beginning of the year, you're at the fourth line. So let's average it. So now you can be on like the second or third line. Oh, shoot, it's hard to get right in the middle of the second and third line. Now we're in a pickle. No, you're going to put them on the first line because you want your team to win, and you want that, that student or that player to maximize their potential. So when a student shows learning through assessment, and this is the other thing, we have to have our eyes open, our ears open. We have to be actually observing what students are doing in our classroom in order to understand whether growth has happened. And when that happens, we need to do the right thing, and we need to tell students where they are, and we need to ensure that their grade or their report card is showing that and not punishing them for, the lack of understanding that they may have had previously.
Yeah. Okay, so what affects students' mindset in math in general? And then what effect do these factors have on assessments?
I think our system most affects, and I would say this also affects their disposition towards mathematics in general. So not just a growth mindset, but, if we're in a system where repeatedly I'm going to school each day, but the assessment and evaluation practices, maybe even the teaching practices that we're using in the classroom, are not actually making me feel as though there's any visible growth, then I'm not going to believe that growth is a thing, because I'm putting in 6 hours a day at school, right? Like I'm doing this every single day, 5 out of 7 days a week, 10 months a year, and I'm not seeing or feeling growth. Then I am going to believe that, based on my own experience, that growth mindset is not a thing, that I'm incapable of learning mathematics. Now, this is beyond assessment and evaluation, though, because again, if we go back to how we teach mathematics, if I teach it as steps and procedures, then there's nothing new that can happen except for the student finally memorizing what's going on over here. So we need to actually change our teaching practice so that we meet that student where they are, better understand. We need to understand where they are in the developmental continuum of math understanding. And if you're here, I need to give you, my finger's all blurry. Look at that. I need to take you from here, and I need to nudge you, and I need to give you the next step to get here. But the problem is oftentimes the student's here and I'm teaching to everyone over here. Mm-hmm. And there is no bridge for that student to be able to move along, which means they're not going to grow. Like, it's not like they're going to get just a part of this, so now they're growing and getting closer. No, there's so much here that they are missing, that we are ignoring and not addressing. Oftentimes it's because we don't understand it ourselves. The math educator itself doesn't know what to do for that student. Mm-hmm. So this student sits here, these students start moving along, and this gap gets bigger. This student, of course, isn't going to believe in a growth mindset because they haven't actually been given an opportunity to grow.
So true. Okay, so my next section is teacher practices. So what are your experiences teaching students math and fostering a growth mindset through assessment? So can you describe it in specific ways?
I think, I mean, if I kind of compare and contrast to how I did teach. I used to teach with a more gradual release of responsibility model. I would model for them, then we would do problems together, and then they would do problems on their own. Now I look at it from a perspective of we need to craft a context. We need to craft a problem for students that they're interested in solving. So it needs to be curious. It needs to, be motivating for students to want to attempt. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be fireworks and all of those things, but it does have to make them curious and want to solve the problem. And then from there, we need to give them the opportunity to solve the problem on their own, using whatever strategies they bring to the table. And through doing that process, my learning goal is to help them get to a more sophisticated strategy, which maybe it might be like a formula, or it might be some sort of big idea that may turn into a procedure eventually. But by allowing students to see that they solved this problem in various ways with various levels of sophistication, you're now letting students see that you are fully capable as a mathematician. And now we're going to try to nudge all of you a little bit further up that spectrum, or I'm pointing down as if the lesson's going, but we're going to move you along that continuum so that students are actually learning something new. So the opportunity that you have is you have different students at different places. This student might have the least sophisticated strategy. Maybe they're using counting as their strategy. This student might be using skip counting. This student might straight up multiply with a known fact. This student might have like an algebraic equation that they're using. And this student might have some other wacky thing going on that maybe the teacher doesn't even know, and that's okay too. And over here, I want them to be able to see that all of these ideas are all connected, and that if we can generalize to create sort of like a, when this scenario happens again, I can use this thing. We help them get the same idea that we had over here, except I'm not just telling them, they're the ones sort of paving that path. They all feel confident that they can do the math in different ways. And then now we're going to work towards becoming proficient with this strategy here. So for me, it's all about a problem-based lesson. We work from actual investigations, and then me as the educator does the teaching after they have the opportunity to grapple with the problem. So they've truly engaged, and now we're going to try to put the pieces together to help them have a new realization about the mathematics. And then we can work to practice it afterwards.
Okay, that makes sense. And then what specific types of assessments have you implemented to foster that growth mindset? So for example, tests or projects.
Yeah, no, totally. For me, every day is an assessment. So I tell students that at the beginning of the year. I never used to do this in the far past. I used to just have my quiz and my test.
Yeah.
The problem with a quiz and a test, especially in this model of teaching, I point over here as if it's still here, but this more traditional direct instruction approach, or direct instruction heavy approach, would be that, like, the teacher's doing all the talking, maybe a couple kids participate, and then kids do independent work. And it would take you until the quiz to realize that half your class is not.
When we reflect on the video of Make Math Moments, I want you to take a minute to see where your teaching practices and what's happening in your classroom is in line with how we think about growth mindset. And how you think about growth mindset might be very different than how I think about growth mindset. But the goal is to think about the video, and if we're walking the walk of growth mindset, are we doing it with our students? Are we promoting that same growth mindset in our classroom and then holding those expectations through assessment, through our lessons? And if so, what does that look like in our classroom? What does that look like in our math teaching practices? And what does that look like through our assessment and feedback if growth mindset is our number one goal for us as teachers and for our students? We have seen this quote many times this year, and I feel like it's important to share it with you again as you reflect on the year as a whole. So, what are students actually doing? Not what do we think they are doing? So, take a moment, let this quote sink in, and notice if you've shifted anything in your school year or if you've shifted anything in your teaching practice based off of this quote.